Did you know that around 10% of your students may have dyslexia, and many of them may be struggling in silence and undiagnosed? In today's episode, I'm going to be diving into what dyslexia is, how it impacts learning, and most importantly, how we can better support these students both in lessons and with homework that we set. So from practical strategies to an exclusive free resource with 10 proven strategies to help, this episode is going to be packed with actionable insights to help you create a more inclusive classroom. Hey there, teachers. Welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast where every week I dive into all the tips and tricks that make teaching life so much easier. Whether you're a veteran educator, an early career teacher learning the ropes, or balancing the classroom with being a busy parent, this will help you streamline your workload and bring a bit more balance to your life. You bring the coffee and I'll bring the Teach and Tell. Hi everyone, and welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, and this is the first episode of a 3-part mini-series all about supporting students with special educational needs and disabilities, or in other words, SEND. So over the next 3 episodes, I'm going to be exploring strategies to support students with dyslexia in this episode, students with autism or ASC, and then finally students who may have ADHD, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed. So inclusivity in the classroom is essential, especially as more students are being diagnosed with neurodivergent conditions. And actually statistics suggest that around 10% of the population in the UK are dyslexic, which means you likely have several dyslexic students in your classes right now, and supporting them effectively can make a life-changing difference to their progress. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on upcoming episodes packed with actionable advice to help you create an inclusive classroom environment, because this has actually been one of my performance management targets for the previous 2 years while I was teaching. And what I found incredibly challenging was I really wanted to support my students, and I could find next to no CPD available for supporting students with ADHD. That's what I focused on in particular. But from that, I also looked at ASC and dyslexia, and I found there's very little out there to support these students. So that's why I've decided to do my own research. I'm not a specialist in this area, but I have done extensive research on this to then discuss and share what I have found. Right, quick coffee catch up. So what have I been up to this week? Now, any of you who are now frequent listeners, hello. And if you are frequent watchers on YouTube, you've probably noticed I'm in the same jumper, same mug, same squash as the last episode. And that's because I do batch film. I filmed 2 in a row because I'm all about streamlining workload and being more efficient, and batching your workload, doing the same task repeatedly, is so efficient. So yes, in terms of my quick coffee catch up, it's going to be very quick today because it's literally what I said last week, because it is the same day, just an hour later. So what have I been doing? Creating those GCSE resources. Not only that though, I have actually still got my flat on the market. So I have been having a couple more viewings. Fingers crossed it picks up again now that it's January, because I need to move before my boys start primary school in September. So the pressure is on a bit. So that's how my week has been. Let me know how your week has been. And as a reminder, just as I said in the last episode, a quick reminder that I am running 3 free online CPD events for teachers. You get the recording, you get the resources. It's Tuesday the 21st of January for the ChatGPT one, Tuesday the 4th of February for how you can streamline your workload, and Tuesday the 4th of March for teaching AQA biology essay. And if you want to attend any or all of those, link is in the description and show notes, completely free. So please come along. I'd love to see some of you there. So let's move on to the main content, and let's start with what is dyslexia. I actually did a master's in education a long time ago now, because I did it with my PGCE and then a couple of years after I qualified. So it must be about 15 years ago. But one of the modules I did was all about dyslexia and supporting students with dyslexia. So this was something that I've been interested in from the start, to try and be as inclusive as possible with teaching. So dyslexia is a specific learning difficulty that affects reading, spelling, and writing abilities. It's not related to intelligence, and many dyslexic individuals excel in creative and problem-solving tasks. So a few key statistics that I've found from my research, and this is accurate as of January 2024. January 2025. I went back a year then. Dyslexia affects approximately 10% of the population, with around 4% experiencing severe challenges. So that means on average, you might have 2 or 3 dyslexic students in your class if you've got a class of 30, whether they're diagnosed or not. And studies show that dyslexic students are more likely to underperform academically if their needs needs are not met. Not because they're less intelligent or less able, it is purely because of the limitations provided from the dyslexia, and this highlights the importance of proactive support in making sure these students are able to reach their full potential. So some signs then of dyslexia in the classroom, and sometimes it's more obvious than not. Sometimes students are diagnosed, sometimes they're not though. And the whole point of inclusivity in the classroom, in my opinion, is when I'm saying let's do this to support a student with dyslexia, whatever strategy it is we're putting in place, it's going to support all students, not just the student with dyslexia. So whether you have anyone diagnosed with dyslexia in your class or not, I still think you should be implementing all of these strategies, because if there's someone undiagnosed, it will help them. Also, it's going to help all students in the classroom. And that's the approach that I take to any support strategy for people with SEND. It will definitely help these students and probably help everyone else as well. So I believe we should be doing it. So back to then the signs of dyslexia in the classroom. Number one, reading difficulties. So you might notice a student is reading slowly or stumbles over words or is struggling with the comprehension of a piece of text. Or it could be from marking work. You've noticed some spelling challenges. So it might be inconsistent spelling, or, and in particular, of familiar words that you would expect a student of that age to know the spelling of, not necessarily of a challenging new biological term, for example. It could be writing issues, so maybe poor sentence structure, grammatical errors, or even messy handwriting. Another sign is memory struggles. So are they having difficulty remembering instructions or sequences of instructions, or just really struggling to remember some key facts that other students are grasping much, much quicker? It could also be low confidence. So maybe a student is really reluctant to participate, and that might be due to the fear of making mistakes when having to read out loud. So how might dyslexia impact students then? These challenges and these signs that we've just talked about often lead to frustration, reduced self-esteem, maybe even a reluctance to engage in learning activities. And in that sense then, it's going to prevent their ability to progress, particularly if they've got low self-esteem and they don't feel that they should ask for help, because they might see it as everyone else can do that and I can't, so that's really embarrassing. I'm not even going to ask because then it shows that I can't do something that I feel I should be able to. So without support, students with dyslexia may experience a sense of failure or even disengage entirely from that subject. So let's then move on to how you can support a student who has dyslexia. And it's not enough to just expect students to practice skills passively. We must actively teach them the tools and strategies they need to succeed, which actually links back to what the previous episode number 8 was about, how to teach skills. So here's the sort of things I'd say that we need to be teaching and supporting to help students who might be dyslexic. So number one is explicitly teach reading and writing strategies. Now this is going to differ depending on your subject and what age you teach. But the way that I implement this at GCSE and A level is thinking about how I teach students to read exam questions carefully and how I teach them to read new biological terms to understand it. So I might, for example, with A level biology, break down new words. So hydrolysis, I literally have it highlighted, hydro in one colour and underlined, and then lysis underlined and in another colour, to show that hydrolysis, you can look at it and break it down to hydrolysis and start to get them to understand that whenever you see hydro in biology, that means water. Whenever you see lysis in biology, that means the split. So hydrolysis means splitting water. So it's those sorts of strategies which will help someone with dyslexia, but it will help all students as well better understand this term. But it's also explicitly teaching them how to look at new biological terms that they might be unfamiliar with and try and break down, looking for parts that they do know to better understand or guess what a term might mean. As well as that, as I said, I teach them how to read exam questions with purpose to better process the information and understand it. So I tell them to either underline or use a highlighter. First of all, the command word. Secondly, any key terms that you notice to better help you to process what you've been asked to do, what keywords or key terms are in there that you might need to draw from. So in this way, we're breaking down this complex task or question into more manageable chunks and steps to understand what you need to put in your answer. That's going to help someone with dyslexia and someone that doesn't. So it's beneficial for all. Number 2 then is using multi-sensory methods. So I try and incorporate visuals or hands hands-on activities or audible instructions as well as written instructions to engage multiple senses, and also to try and make sure at least one of the strategies that I've used a student can engage with and understand. So I'll always try and have an image, like a picture on the whiteboard, as well as the text, as well as me giving the instructions. So you've got all three options there to try and engage the students and to have at least one approach that someone can understand what I'm asking them to do. Number 3 is providing accessible resources. And this in particular can be for homework tasks when you're not there to explain the information, but also any worksheets you might be giving out. So try and make sure you are using clear, large fonts, which I'm sure all teachers do. That one, I guess, goes without saying. As well as clear spacing, which I have been guilty of in the past, trying to reduce the printing budget and the amount that I print. I might have crammed it all in really tightly, but looking back, that really isn't helpful for students with dyslexia, or not, because if it's all squashed onto one page, they sometimes miss bits of the information because it's all squashed so closely together. So large fonts, clear spacing, pastel backgrounds or white backgrounds to reduce any visual strain. So it's not going to be difficult to read, like black and red. That's really difficult to read if you've got red text on a black background. Most teachers, I think, or pretty much every teacher is aware of this, but worth a reminder, particularly with PowerPoints or homework activities that are set. Number 4 is leveraging assistant technology. And this could be in particular for homework tasks, especially with students who have severe dyslexia. So there are tools out there that will do text to speech, and you can have audiobooks or spelling aids that can really level the playing field. So that's the sort of thing to look into if you do have students with severe dyslexia, where you could be setting your homework task and maybe give them a link, or they may well have their own software readily available where they can do text to speech software. So for example, Speechify does exactly that. It turns text to speech, and that can be for reading information, and you get an AI voice generator. Number 5 is planning assessments thoughtfully. If someone is diagnosed with dyslexia, they should be entitled to at least 25% extra time on an exam. And one thing that is really going to help students not feel like a burden or insecure is making sure you are aware of those students in your class who are entitled to extra time, so they don't have to prompt you and remind them, but also try and consider how you can give them that extra time without it being a burden on them. So often we might make class tests an hour long and you have an hour lesson, or maybe 55 minutes long, so you've got time to hand it out and collect it in. But that then means a student that's got extra time has to either miss their extra time because they've got a lesson next, or go to their next lesson late, work into their break time, work into their lunchtime to get the extra time. So they're essentially being punished for having dyslexia or whatever their SEND need is. So what I suggest instead is, if possible as a department, could you have the test is actually shorter, so that when the students then get their 25% extra time, that then means they're still able to complete it within the lesson. What that means for the rest of the class is you would need to go and silently collect it in, and they then have 15 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it is, silent reading, or you can have prepped an extra activity where maybe it's just some multiple choice questions or short answer questions for them to complete in silence, while the other students who do have extra time get their extra time without it being too obvious, because if this becomes a norm, then they're just used to that when a test ends, you maybe do an evaluation form or some extra questions or silent reading. And then you're not using up their break and their lunchtime, which is not fair basically for them. Number 6 is encouraging positive reinforcement. And this goes for all students. We should be celebrating successes, no matter how small, to try and build student confidence, especially if it is someone that has really been struggling to remember the spelling of a particular word, or even just remembering some key concepts. It doesn't have to be a big deal necessarily in front of the whole class if you think that's going to highlight and embarrass them. It could be a quick word at the end of the lesson just to show that you have noticed that they have made progress, and that the fact they've done that is amazing, and you now know that they'll continue to do that. So making sure that you are acknowledging their successes. Number 7, setting homework thoughtfully. And I've partially talked about this already with the clear font, large font, spacing, text to speech, but making sure that you are providing clear instructions and ensure the tasks are manageable without excessive time or stress, because that is going to support all students, not just students with dyslexia, if they are able to really obviously understand what they're being asked to do. It also helps because They're not then going to come back and ask you for instructions. And if they need to ask a parent or guardian for help, if the instructions are really clear, then they'll be able to read it and support their child. So there we have it. That's a little bit of background about dyslexia, how we can support students, and just as a reminder, the overall importance of why I truly believe it's so essential we should be doing this is students with dyslexia are often not able to reach their potential because their needs are not being met in every lesson, and that is potentially limiting them. Okay, so moving on to the quick win of the week. This week's quick win recommendation is visiting the British Dyslexia Association, BDA, and the website is bdadyslexia.org.uk. It's written here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, but it's also linked in the show notes. This is a goldmine of information, tips, tricks, and also resources for teachers, offering guides on how to support students with dyslexia. So if you do have time, I do highly recommend you have a quick look through that website for a quick win to support your students. And following on from that is our resource roundup. If you feel you don't have time to go and have a look at the website and do some of your own research, I completely understand. We have a lot on our plate as teachers, which is why I've created you a one-page free PDF, deliberately one page, so it's quick and easy for you to digest and take some key ideas from. And this one page has a brief overview explaining dyslexia in simple terms, including top 10 strategies to support students with dyslexia. So if you do want to get your hands on that PDF, there's a link in the show notes and the YouTube description so you can get your copy to download. So in conclusion then of today's episode, understanding and supporting students with dyslexia is a vital part of creating an inclusive classroom. By implementing the strategies I've gone through today, you can make meaningful differences to students with dyslexia and actually all students, education, and potentially their future as well. So please, if you do have time, make sure you download that free PDF for a quick reference guide that you can look back on. And if you did find today helpful, don't forget to subscribe and also listen into next week where we're talking about autism spectrum condition, and also the following week where it's all about ADHD. If you did find this episode helpful, I'd also really appreciate it if you could leave a review or a comment, because that helps to boost these videos and the podcast so that more teachers will see them and therefore we can help more students as well. But that's it for this week. I hope you found it helpful. I'll see you next week when it's all about autism spectrum condition. You bring the coffee and I'll bring the teach and tell.